Marie Roget, 21, was notoriously known as the beautiful girl that worked at the New York tobacco shop that catered to high society men. When her body was discovered July 28, 1841 in the Hudson River, investigators believed that she was a victim of gang violence, but one witness swore she was dumped after a failed abortion attempt. Her boyfriend's suicide note would suggest that he was possibly involved in her death. Her case remains unsolved and inspired Edgar Allan Poe's detective story, The Mystery of Marie Roget. This is episode 2 of Archive Dive, A Mystery in History. Mary was born in 1821 in Connecticut. She was an only child to a widowed mother and grew up to be very striking. When she was 17 years old, her father James died in a steamboat explosion. In 1840, Mary, now 19, was rather tall with what was described as exquisite symmetrical form and a beautiful complexion with a wealth of jet black hair. Besides being physically stunning, everyone said that she had a very pleasing personality. That spring, John Anderson, who was the owner of a large retail cigar store on Broadway near Thomason Street, had heard of Mary's striking beauty and came to Mary's mother and offered her a position in his store. He wanted to employ Mary not just as a clerk, but as an attraction. Mary's mother was hesitant at first, but she was being offered a hefty wage, and eventually her mother agreed that Mary could accept the position. Anderson was right. Once customers realized that Mary worked at the cigar store, they began flocking to the store. It's reported that while Mary was always pleasant and smiled, she also didn't hesitate to ward off unwelcome advances. After being at the cigar store for about 10 months, one morning Mary failed to show up for work and Anderson was unable to get a hold of her and her mother didn't know where she was. It was reported to authorities that she was missing and the press picked up the story and ran with it. And the theories about the missing cigar girl splashed across every front page headline. The Sun newspaper reported that Mary disappeared from her home and that her mother Phoebe had found a suicide note left behind. The local coroner was called in to analyze this suicide note and he revealed that he believed that Mary had a, quote, fixed and unalterable determination to destroy herself, end quote. The next day, the Times Commercial Intelligence reported that Mary's disappearance and subsequent press was simply a publicity stunt for her boss to bring more attention to the tobacco shop. It was quickly determined by investigators that Mary hadn't vanished, leaving a note behind. She was actually visiting a friend in Brooklyn. But that didn't satisfy those in town, and there were rumors circulating that she was actually seen with a handsome naval officer during the time she was supposed to be visiting family out in the country. It was now a widely circulated rumor that would reach Mary, and she decided to resign her position and to hide away at her mother's home, away from the rumors and the press. In July of 1841, Mary was now engaged to Daniel Payne, a clerk who resided at her mother's boarding home. On the 25th of July, 1841, Mary knocked on Daniel's room and told her that she had plans to visit her aunt and family members. He acknowledged her plans and said that he would call for her later that night. But as the evening wore on, a massive storm came and poured down so much rain that Daniel believed it would be best for Mary to stay at her aunt's home, and he would send for her in the morning. When Daniel informed Mary's mother that he didn't go pick up Mary from her aunt's because of the storm, at first Mary's mother thought, well, that's a good idea to not bring her home in such a storm. However, the next day when the storm subsided and Mary hadn't returned home, that's when she became extremely upset and worried that something was wrong. When Daniel returned back to the boarding home expecting Mary to be home as well, and Mary's mother let him know that she hadn't arrived, he immediately headed over to Mary's aunt's home only to find that she had never arrived. Mary's mother and fiancé reported her missing, and since this was the second disappearance of the well-known cigar girl, this created an even bigger sensation with reporters and even more rumors than the first time she disappeared. On July 28, 3 days later, police would find Mary's badly beaten body floating down the Hudson River in Hoboken, New Jersey. She was found with a heavy stone fastened by a rope around her waist, and around her neck was a piece of her dress tied tightly, leading to what investigators believed was her strangulation. Coroners were able to determine that she had been badly beaten and sexually assaulted before her death. Daniel was the first one to be interrogated by authorities, but they were able to account for his movements that day, and he was quickly dismissed as a suspect. Headlines would refer to Mary as the, quote, beautiful cigar girl, end quote, and instantly her death and the mystery surrounding it were sensationalized by newspapers everywhere, and her case received national attention. But that didn't help investigators get any closer to solving her case, and the press began to criticize the police in every article. Initially, it was believed that Mary was murdered or dumped by an abortionist, Madame Roll, after a failed procedure, but that was ruled out as simply a rumor. Another popular theory pushed by the newspapers was that Mary was killed by gang violence, and they used this story to point to the ineptitude and the corruption of the law enforcement in New York City at the time. Another theory that was backed up by witnesses came from a young man who sent a letter anonymously from Hoboken to the coroner declaring that he had seen Mary in Hoboken on Sunday. He said he hadn't come forward sooner because, quote, motives of perhaps criminal prudence, end quote. The letter went on to explain that while he was walking in the once infamous summer resort called Elysian Fields, he saw a boat pull out from the New York side containing 6 what he described as rough-looking men and a well-dressed girl that he recognized as Mary Rogers. He said it seemed like, despite how rough these men looked, that Mary was willingly going with him, and this boat pulled onto a beach and Mary willingly walked into the woods with these men. He said he saw a second boat pull up not far behind them on the beach, and these were well-dressed men, and they approached and asked the men that were already on the beach whether they were using violence towards Mary, who they said they both recognized as well. The few men left on the beach told them that Mary willingly went into the woods, so the 2 well-dressed men returned to their boat and headed back to New York. Despite never being able to confirm who wrote this letter or the authenticity of it, it was published in the newspaper throughout the nation. Shortly after the publication, a stage driver named Adams would come forward and state that he did see Mary arrive in Hoboken at the Bull's Ferry accompanied by a tall, well-dressed man of dark complexion, and she went with him into the roadhouse near Fields known as Nick Mullen's. A woman named Miss Ross, who was the keeper of the Mullins house, said that she remembered a man that came into her place with a young woman that matched Mary's description, and they were seen going into the adjoining woods after having a few drinks. She did say that soon after they went into the woods, she did hear a woman scream coming from the woods, but the beach was known to have questionable characters, and there were sounds like screams often heard, so she didn't think much about it at the time. The spot where Mary had been murdered would be discovered September 25th by 2 children playing in the woods. They found Mary's white petticoat, her scarf, her parasol, and a linen handkerchief marked with the initials MR. The ground beneath the clothing was trampled and showed a horrible struggle. Investigators believe that she was killed in that spot and was most likely dragged through the bushes towards the river where she was dumped. Investigators spent every resource and every effort to track down this tall, dark-complected man, thinking that he may have even been the mysterious man she had disappeared with once before. They were never able to confirm this man, but they do believe that Mary's mother knew more about this man than she ever chose to come forward about. Just a few weeks after Mary's murder, it was said that Daniel was suffering greatly from her loss, and after learning the place of her untimely death, he went to that spot in the woods where they found her and took his own life. There was a note found on his person that read, quote, "To the world, here I am on the very spot. May God forgive me for my misspent life," end quote. In 1842, Mary's story was said to be fictionalized by Edgar Allan Poe in The Mystery of Marie Roget. In this book, the story takes place in Paris, and the body is found in the River Seine. Poe would write in a letter, quote, "Under the pretense of showing how Dewin unraveled the mystery of Marie's assassination, I, in fact, entered into the very rigorous analysis of the real tragedy in New York," end quote. Despite a largely publicized case and relentless reporting, Mary's case was never solved. But the mystery of what happened to the pretty cigar girl remains a stain in New York's history. What do you think happened to Mary Rogers, the infamous cigar girl? I will see you all back here next week for another mystery in history.